Super Mario RPG Legend of the Seven Stars, or just Super Mario RPG for short, is a 1996 SNES game by Square and published by Nintendo, which is an interesting company team-up. I have a lot of feelings about this game, mostly positive, some negative, and today we're going to be looking at everything about it. This is the first part in the series I'm going to be doing on the Mario RPGs as a whole. Are they really as great as the people who play them say they are? Well, I'm going to be taking a critical look at them, and I'll tell you how I feel. Ultimately, it's up to you to decide what you think about them. But for now, let's just start where it all began. Super Mario RPG, Legend of the Seven Stars. So, Super Mario RPG is about Mario and his party trying to find the pieces of the Star Road that's been scattered across the Mushroom Kingdom in order to defeat an evil entity by the name of Smithy and repair the Star Road so wishes can work again. It's an interesting setup, though I don't think it's as great as everyone says it is. Anyway, the game takes a lot of influence from Final Fantasy, with how special moves work being essentially just spells from that series with the addition of action commands. There's a lot of turn-based battles, so you can only have 3 party members instead of the typical 4. I think the biggest first step here is that, aside from being the first Mario RPG, it's the first Mario game period where you can fully explore 3D environments. Kinda. I mean, they're technically 2D isometric areas, but there's a surprising amount of platforming depth for a game with RPG in the title. Super Mario RPG has great humor and incredibly good-looking graphics that have aged spectacularly. It inspired a ton of Mario RPGs that followed it that featured gameplay mechanics that drew directly from it. But how did an idea like this even come about? Doesn't it seem a little ridiculous? Super Mario RPG was developed because the creator of the Mario series, Shigeru Miyamoto, really wanted to make a Mario RPG, and Square wanted to create an RPG that would sell well to Western markets. Of course, Mario has always been a staple in American markets, so naturally in 1994, Nintendo and Square held a business meeting, and after that development began. The first phase of development was spent deciding on the graphical presentation, with them landing on the isometric perspective because it would be able to allow the characters to be much more expressive. And, to be completely honest, I think this choice really paid off. The platforming aspects were included to make the game closer to the Mario series, which is another part of the game I really appreciate. Development really started in the second quarter of 1995, where the graphics, programming, and the main story planning started. The game was officially unveiled by Miyamoto and the co-director of the game, Chihiro Fujioka, at the 1995 V-Jump Festival event in Japan. Miyamoto then led 2 teams, both at Nintendo and Square, who spent most of a year working on the game's graphics alone. The game got to about 70% completion in October 1995. Graphically speaking, not only is it very visually expressive and fun, but there's actually a lot of cutting-edge stuff going on here. There are special lighting effects in the game that improve the shadows and reflections. The incredibly impressive CG models were designed by Shinya Takahashi, who would later go on to be president of Nintendo EPD, the largest game development division in Nintendo. Mario's ability to jog in 8 directions and jump up or down in a 3/4 perspective gave him a very large range of motion compared to most RPGs at the time, something that I, again, greatly appreciate. Something particularly cool about this game and specific presentation-wise is that the battle animations change depending on what weapon you're using. That must have taken a lot of modeling work, and I vastly appreciate it. When Nintendo of America received a prototype copy of the game in November, they were shocked to find out that it was a turn-based RPG. Apparently they just didn't tell them what the game was. Whatever. Due to the constant updates and revisions to the game, the translation was delayed several times from December to February to late spring, but eventually, the North American version got through. There are a few weird changes in the version we got. For example, the Chancellor Toad is called the Minister, but it's a pretty solid translation. The game's soundtrack was composed by the venerable Yoko Shimomura of Street Fighter II fame, who incorporated several songs from Koji Kondo's original Mario scores as well as some of Nobuo Uematsu's tracks from the Final Fantasy games. Her work on this game isn't my favorite of her works, but there are a few songs that I like quite a bit. Standouts are Beware the Forest Mushrooms, which I'm sure you've heard, and Tadpole Pond. Later that year, NTT Publishing released the music as a 2-disc CD titled Super Mario RPG Original Sound Version. I'm not sure why releases of video game music always have Original Sound Version in the name, especially in the 90s, but whatever. It might just be a weird translation thing. Something interesting about this game is that it's one of the only games released outside of Japan to use the SA-1 chip. This is a chip that only some SNES cartridges have that allows higher clock speeds, faster access to the RAM, greater memory mapping capabilities, new direct memory access modes, and a built-in CIC lookout for piracy protection and regional marketing control. I don't really know what all that means, but it sounds neat. Besides the anti-piracy stuff, that's pretty cringe. Interestingly enough, the PAL audience wouldn't officially get the game until 2008 when it came out on the Wii Shop Virtual Console. This is because PAL TVs have a lot of discrepancies in frame rate when compared to NTSC TVs, and it's the entire reason the PAL distinction exists in the first place. I'm not really going to get into it here, but it makes sense, especially since Super Mario RPG was one of the last SNES games anyway, even if it is incredibly unfortunate that it never came over there. So, what is Super Mario RPG actually like? Well, it's a lot like a lot of other RPGs. In fact, in some ways, it's kind of the platonic form of RPG, at least in combat sense. There's a pretty basic split between the overworld segments and battling. Most of the game is on the overworld and not about battling monsters, which is honestly for the best because that's the most fun part. Exploring these environments with Mario and jumping around is really great. I think they made him handle really well. An interesting choice that a lot of RPGs at the time were making is that there aren't random encounters. You simply attack the enemies you see on the map. Exploration is so fun that it makes enemies feel like a punishment though, and you'll often want to avoid them even if it ends up making things harder for you in the long run. I never avoid battles. Again, they're pretty much mandatory to surviving through the game, but I don't really like them, and I often strongly consider avoiding them, which to me does not a good battle system make. You start out with just Mario in your party, but as the plot progresses you eventually end up with 5 characters who can only be switched between while you're on the overworld. Except Mario, he always stays in the front of your party. He is eternal. Each character has a unique set of abilities similar to Final Fantasy IV's party. Mario is sort of an all-around type character with good magic attacks and good physical attacks. Mallow is all about dealing elemental damage with some minor healing capabilities, which would be useful if you were able to tell what enemies had which type disadvantages. Geno is just straight up busted in terms of damage, and you should always be using him. Princess Toadstool is a broken healer who can basically just do anything, from reviving people to fully healing the entire party at once, and Bowser is shit. Sorry, Bowser. Better luck next time you're playable in an RPG, huh? Something that I really don't like about the combat is the introduction of action commands. Later Mario RPGs would make them more interesting, but here they add essentially nothing. You literally just hit the button when the game tells you to. That's it. It's so incredibly boring. It's such a superfluous mechanic, and frankly, I don't really know why it's in the game, especially since there's so many animations created specifically for these action commands. It must have been a lot of work. And again, we'll be seeing this mechanic again later in the Mario RPGs, and it's done much better as the series goes on. Anyway, this next segment is probably going to be the most controversial part of my video among the people who like Mario RPG. Needless to say, I don't really care for the plot, characters, or setting of the game at all, really. The setting is just the standard Mushroom Kingdom, and while there are various unique creature designs that inhabit it, at the end of the day it all feels very standard geographically. There's a grass level, an underground level, forest level, you get the gist. It's nothing new for Mario. I like the Mole Town though, moles are cute. As for the characters, well, they aren't much to write home about either. Mario is, well, Mario. He has some funny gags involving his ability to shapeshift through pantomime that he only possesses in this game, but for the most part, he's just the same as he always is. The only character who I think has a full, compelling story in this game is your second party member, Mallow. As shitty as he is from a combat perspective, his journey of finding his family is really quite compelling and leads to a lot of interesting and cute interactions. I particularly like when Mario reads his wish on Star Hill to find his parents and Mallow gets all embarrassed about it. The hardened badass wooden doll Geno is not my least favorite character, but I'm not sure how he got legions of fans who adore him. He's cool, I guess, but he doesn't really have much going for him beyond that, and the fact that he's overpowered in fights. Bowser is really expressive and hilarious in terms of writing. The way he interacts with the characters is honestly superb, and I'm really glad that this style of writing him continued throughout the RPG. The dude writes a haiku about how he thinks everyone is stupid. I can respect that. Finally, there's Princess Toadstool, who, despite being completely overpowered, is my least favorite party member. She does absolutely nothing in the plot. A lot of people like to emphasize that this is the first game where she gets narrative agency, but she doesn't really. She just joins your party and then never really does anything again. There aren't any fun interactions with her, besides, I guess, the one where you find her porn, but like, why is that the only one? Seriously. Of course, no discussion of this game will be complete without its main antagonist, Smithy. Proponents of the Mario RPGs often emphasize the fact that they have villains different to Bowser in them, but frankly, I don't think that inherently makes them good. Oftentimes, the villains are pretty great, as we will soon come to see, but Smithy is a really lackluster character. You never really get a chance to know him, he's just an imposing and ominous threat lurking in the shadows the whole game. While that might work for some, to me, it just leads to a character that I don't care about at all. Let's talk about the plot, because something that is often praised about Super Mario RPG is its plot, for some reason. I wouldn't be able to tell you why. The opening is actually a really genius and interesting way of recreating the classic Mario and Bowser struggle, and Exor crashing into the castle at the end of it all is a really powerful moment. I like it. This is one of the most bleak setups for any Mario game. The bridge to the castle gets destroyed by Exor, so Mario has to find another way in, and upon going to the capital, the Mushroom Kingdom, he meets Mallow. Some hijinks ensue to get back Mallow's grocery money, but the town gets taken over by the first member of the Smithy Gang. After this member of the Smithy Gang, Mac, gets beaten up, the two get the first of many pieces of the Star Road. Mallow's grandpa then tells Mallow he's actually a cloud person, not a tadpole, I could have told him that myself, and that they need to get all of the star pieces so they can reassemble Star Road. Again, I like this setup. The two of them set out to find who Mallow's biological parents are and to repair the Star Road. I've always felt that the stuff surrounding Mallow as a character is where most of the game's writing is focused because it's incredibly well planned. This is a great reason for him to tag along with Mario. In Rosetown, a bow-shaped man and member of the Smithy Gang named Bowyer is attacking the small settlement and paralyzing the people there with arrows. Geno shows up. He's a wooden doll owned by a small child who becomes animated by a star spirit and joins the group here after helping them defeat Bowyer and nabbing the second star piece. He joins them as it is his solemn duty to repair the Star Road, and this is the furthest Geno ever develops. He has a really strong introduction to the party, going to fight Bowyer alone, even a cute moment where he bumps his head on some stairs. But the fact that he doesn't do anything notable for the rest of the game really holds him back. Eventually, after gathering another star piece, which is a completely unmemorable segment, it has cute moles, but otherwise nothing happens in it, they meet up with Bowser at Booster Tower, who begrudgingly makes the three of the members of the Koopa Troop in order to help him reclaim his castle. Having Bowser in your party is a really cool aspect of the game, but then you don't use him because you realize he sucks. Still, this was one of his first playable appearances, so it was pretty cool at the time to use the bad side. Booster's Tower in and of itself is a great dungeon. It's apparently where Toadstool was being held this whole time, and you have to get past the eccentric character Booster in order to rescue her. This guy is comedically stellar, and his dungeon has some of the best platforming challenges in the entire game. Plus, it started the tradition of Easter egg where Mario turns 8-bit that some of these RPGs like to have. The music here is very on point. When you first enter, it plays an incredibly regal piece before you get to the second floor and it blasts train music. It's just... yes, this is Booster. I love the twist of that joke. It's a very small joke, but I like it a lot. Booster tries to marry Toadstool, but he has no idea what marriage is, and actually just wants the wedding cake. Come on, you could have just asked for the cake, man. When they return Princess Toadstool to the Mushroom Kingdom, she sneaks out and rejoins them, which is a great character moment, but then she proceeds to do nothing for the rest of the game. Then you go to Star Hill on the second ship to get 2 more star pieces, and frankly nothing really that interesting happens in either of those places. Jonathan Jones is pretty cool, I guess. This is my biggest problem with Super Mario RPG. There simply aren't that memorable locations or characters. You have your occasional Booster or Jonathan Jones, but for every one of those, there's like a fucking Pommel or Gaz or something. I guess the town with monsters is fun? I don't know. It's a road trip adventure where the people the cast meets along the way aren't focused on nearly enough. In addition to the cast itself, save for Mallow and occasionally Bowser. But speaking of Mallow, after getting 5 star pieces, you end up in Nimbus Land, his birth town, which is being subjugated by a tyrannical girl boss. You have to sneak into the castle with the help of a statue maker who paints Mario gold drip and find out that Mallow is the true prince, and overthrow the monarchy. This is one of my favorite parts of the plot just because it's such a fun climax to what's going on with Mallow. Nimbus Palace is my favorite dungeon in the game just because it's so aesthetically and narratively interesting. Mallow is the only character whose personal goal ends up being fulfilled before the end of the game, and that is something that I find very interesting because he has to make a choice to keep going with the party to save the world or not, and he chooses to try and save the world regardless of already having found his family. It shows how far he's come, and I'm really proud of the little guy. After another uninteresting dungeon that's a generic volcano, and a very interesting boss fight against parodies of the Power Rangers, the gang learns that the final star piece must be in Bowser's Castle, so they end up traveling there. The Bowser's Castle dungeon is pretty well executed, aside from the annoying minigame rooms that often ask weird tasks from you that the game hasn't prepared you for at all. Like, you have to be able to calculate how many barrels are in specific stack formations and stuff as a jelly bean jar type puzzle. I'm really not a fan of when games punish you for not practicing skills that the game didn't even teach you. It's annoying. Then, while fighting Exor the Giant Sword, you go inside his mouth, which proves that Vor has been a staple of the Mario RPGs since the beginning, and end up in Smithy's dimension. The factory is such an aesthetically desolate and interesting setting. This land where everything is a mass-produced machine robot built for war. It's so grim. I don't see people talk about this section of the game enough. It's incredibly apocalyptic, and it's a great way of showing you what the stakes are in no uncertain terms. If you fail, this is what will become of the Mushroom Kingdom. It's a really great moment, but I think it comes a little too late. It's hard to take the villain seriously when you don't really see what he's capable of until the final hours of the game. Then you fight Smithy, and while his boss fight is mechanically varied with him changing his head shape in order to emphasize different stats, it's a pushover. That's another problem with this game that I haven't talked much about. The game is really easy. This is just a common problem with the Mario RPGs. Beating them never really feels all that satisfying because of how easily everything goes down in them. I get that they're for beginners, but I'd appreciate a harder difficulty option or something. Though this problem was mildly fixed with the super boss Culex, that itself becomes its own weird difficulty and consistency. It's a random spike. You don't really expect it, and it feels odd. Anyway, Geno goes home, Mallow becomes prince and perpetuates systems of monarchical abuse and power, Mario and Toadstool go home, and Bowser rebuilds his castle from the whole, giant sword thing happening. Overall, the plot of this game feels incredibly unfocused, and while it definitely has some moments where it hits really hard, particularly when it centers around Mallow, it's really a lot of just going from one place to the next, with very little locations or characters of interest. There's not a lot going on here, and I'm not sure why people talk about this game's story like it's an amazing masterpiece of fiction. It's fun, that's fine. I don't really think the story has to be anything more than that. I'm just merely talking about the standard other people have discussed it with. Now, a lot of people also say that this is one of the best games of all time, and again, I just don't see it. I think the gameplay is fun, if incredibly easy, the writing is humorous, the platforming is really inventive, and the graphics are unique. Even though I'm not a huge fan of the story and characters, I think that they're serviceable and work fine in the context of the game. I just don't really know if any of this makes it one of the best games of all time. It's solid, but I don't see how it can even be compared to some of the other games on its own console, like especially Chrono Trigger. Though a sequel was never made for the game, there have been the Mario RPGs that came after it, which were all spiritual successors to this one. However, there was one point in time where there was going to be a sequel on the Nintendo 64 DD, aka the Nintendo 64 disk drive, which is a very large rabbit hole, but essentially it was an add-on that allowed disc-based games to play on it. That sequel ended up being put on the Nintendo 64 instead, and it's what we call Paper Mario now due to licensing issues. Paper Mario has a lot of similarities to Super Mario RPG, such as the collection of 7 stars being a pivotal part of its narrative, the usage of action commands, although Paper Mario's are improved, and the fact that there's one shared MP pool that all characters use, which is weird in both games and I don't like it. Not only that, both Fujioka and his co-director Yoshihiko Maekawa went on to work at Alpha Dream, and were involved with pretty much every game in the Mario & Luigi series, another RPG spiritual successor to Super Mario RPG. Yoko Shimomura even made her return for those games. Geno even makes a cameo in Mario & Luigi Superstar Saga, notable as his only appearance outside of his debut. He was eventually removed in the 2017 remake of the game, and due to massive debt acquired by Alpha Dream in 2018, the company shut down for good the next year, which leaves one Mario RPG series basically dead. Something interesting about Super Mario RPG is that there's one other way it lives on besides its Mario RPG contemporaries. That weird 2006 children's book Mario and the Incredible Rescue. It's 2006, guys, why are you using Super Mario 64 renders? That game's 10 years old. Okay, but in all seriousness, it lives on through the fact that Geno has been heavily requested for Super Smash Bros. For a very long time, despite not being a very interesting or notable character. Why he is so feverishly requested by people is beyond me, but he has gotten included as a sticker, a Mii costume, and a spirit in the series before due to the high demand for the character. So I think that's probably the biggest part of Super Mario RPG's legacy. One of its characters breaking from the obscurity of the original release and into the limelight, for whatever reason. I don't hate Super Mario RPG, I just don't think it's really that incredible. It's a fun adventure with some characters that I like seeing and I wish interacted with each other more. The battles are boring, but tolerable, and the platforming is actually a really fresh take on overworld exploration in RPG. Again, I just don't really see how any of it is particularly outstanding or worthy of massive praise. To me, it's just a solid RPG adventure, and sometimes that's okay. I don't think it's a bad game at all. I like playing it. It's fine. This has been Arcade Everlasting, who still can't beat Culex, signing off. Thank you for watching.